Um, and today we are having our panel on careers in data analytics, where some professionals from the field have generously donated some of their time to answer some of our questions, as well as hopefully some of your questions as well. So be ready to ask questions. We'll go through that in a moment. But just a brief little history of who we are. This event is brought to you today by the Technology and Design Career Community at DePaul. We are part of the DePaul Career Center. Again, my name is Lauren Bobrin. I wish my name was Lauren Bronin, that would be cool. I am the career advisor at DePaul. I do a lot of student-facing work with students, both active students as well as DePaul alumni in advising. We'll put a link in the chat and how you can schedule advising appointments to follow up with any of us if you have further questions. Jamison Dixon, who is our Assistant Director for Employer Engagement. He works on the employer-facing side. And Sang Lee, our career ambassador and also current master's student in the data analytics program here at DePaul, or business analytics, I should say, I'm sorry. And she's going to actually be leading our conversation today. We wanted to kind of introduce you, kind of put a face to this event and just let you know, hey, if you have questions about this or anything else that's career related, please come and talk to us. We are here for that. Both Sang and I are here for advising. We would love to talk to you about any questions, issues, concerns you have about your career path, your resume, interview tips, all that fun stuff and more. So don't be shy about talking to us and setting up appointments with us afterwards. Without further ado, our panelists that are here today, Lorraine Fury, lead data scientist with Booz Allen Hamilton, Mike Cozy, with the Senior Director of Technology Solutions at HABI, as well as Dorian Gray, data scientist with Navistar. Lucas Filipek will hopefully be joining us shortly. We are going to go ahead and get started. I am going to turn things over to Sang and stop sharing my screen.
All right, thanks Lauren for the introduction. So hi everyone, my name is Sang Lee, and as Lauren said, I am the career ambassador and also an analytics student. So I'm really excited about this event, as an organizer, but also as a student. But yeah, I mean, this event isn't about me, it's about our panelists. So first things first, I guess if the panelists could, maybe tell us about yourself a little bit, about your current role and how you came about to be in your current role.
All right, I'll go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Lorraine Fury, currently a lead data scientist at Booz Allen Hamilton. If you aren't familiar with that company, we do a lot of work with federal government. So a lot of my clients are with the Department of Defense, and I help them either implement new data strategies into their work environment or introduce ways to automate their current processes. How I got into this, I've always had an interest in math and sociology. I have 2 degrees of that in my undergrad. And before data science was a term, I just knew I wanted to be able to help people who weren't as friendly to math become more friendly and comfortable, because math is everywhere. So yeah, I think that's it for me.
I go next. Mike Cozy from HABI. HABI is a supply chain and logistics organization. We support McDonald's, so we run most of their supply chain, both here in North America as well as across the globe. My current role in the organization is to lead technology for 2 of our business units, one of those being sourcing, which is where we act as an extension of McDonald's as well as other customers to be a category leader for the products that they are procuring. And then the second is I support Happy Meal Toys. So we oversee about 50% of creative design and 100% of production of Happy Meal Toys, and then distribution of them across the globe, which from a volume perspective is about 1.7 billion toys a year. So how did I get into the current, opportunity? I've been at HABI for 8 years. This is my 3rd role within HABI. And I would say my whole career, which spans over 25 years, has been in the technology field in some form or shape. And, one common theme that I see probably more so now than I've had at any other time in my career is the underlying theme of data. And, that goes from everything from how do we consume it and ingest it to store it to, be able to access it and then visualize it, and the analytics that we can gain from it, and especially forward looking and predictive from that perspective. So while I don't necessarily directly work with a lot of the data, the team I have and the other teams that we partner with, data is a major topic of every project and every strategy that we're undergoing right now. So I see it as definitely something that will continue to grow into the future. Glad to be here with all of you today.
And I think I'm the third one then. Dorian Gray at Navistar. We're a truck, bus, and engine manufacturer out in the Chicago suburbs. When you see a school bus, there's like a 1 in 3 chance it's one of ours, to give you an idea of who we are. How I got into data science and into this role. I took a data mining class, not really as a lark, but to kind of see what it was, and did well enough in that the professor, Dr. Reku, offered me a job in her lab. And after working in there for a little bit, she helped me get an internship at Navistar, which led to full employment. I worked in their IT for a number of years, and then helped form the data science team when that was formed about 5 years ago. And that's how I got to where I am now.
All right, thank you for sharing, everyone. I think it's really interesting to hear all of your different experiences, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to every one of you was interested in this field. So I think that's really neat. And since Dorian shared a bit about how he got started, I think it would be interesting for our students to also hear how you guys got started. What were some of the challenges you faced while searching for jobs as a student, and how did you overcome these?
I can go. I think it has evolved over time. When I was a student in many of your positions and seats, I leveraged the team that you have in front of you. My undergrad was from Northern Illinois University, and the Career Center, especially during your junior and senior year as an undergrad, was your friend, right? To try to find that first opportunity, and that's where I got my start. So that's how I think you should continue to take advantage of what was offered at the beginning of the call, and drive from that perspective. As you continue to go and grow in your career, I would suggest that it's really going to come more so from your network. So who are the people that you're meeting? Who are the vendors that you've worked with? Who are the folks that you went to school with that you keep in touch with? Being involved in different organizations, I think is key to finding those new opportunities. As I progressed and moved through my career, that's usually how I found the next opportunity, was through some connection at an organization, or at least one level off from that.
I would say I got my start in 2 ways. The most polished answer would be doing multiple research internships during undergrad to just try to figure out how applied I wanted to be, or what are the different type of real world problems I could use my skills against. The unpolished answer, MySpace. That's really, MySpace was like my introduction to like technology, being able to craft a different vision, take a template and make it into my own. So just following that passion, and similar to what everyone else has mentioned, like being able to leverage my networks, being comfortable asking questions, even if it's just kind of like cold calling or cold emailing. Hey, I noticed you're in this organization, and I know that they have some data science stuff. When can we set up a time so we can talk about like, what does that mean? Or how can I become a part of that? So that's kind of how I've been able to guide my path in data science and keep evolving from that.
Yeah, and you had asked about hurdles that we had run into. The main one that comes to mind is that when I was going to DePaul way back when, which in some ways predates the term data science. So now I feel like the oldest man in the room right now. It was all data miner was the term. We were using MATLAB and SAS as our languages for analytics. And so when we were forming our data science team, that's not the languages we wanted to go with. We wanted to go with R and Python. So there was a bit of quick learning of new languages that we had to develop. And then the other just thing to keep in mind is that school is great in that it gives you a list of skills that you need to learn, but the maintaining and learning new skills and figuring out what your gaps are is kind of the ongoing challenge.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Actually, we have our fourth panelist here ready to join us. His name is Lucas. He is the senior manager in data science at US Foods. So far, we've just asked the panelists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about where you're at right now in your role, and we've also talked about how your first, job search experience was as a student, and what were some of the challenges you faced back then.
Sure. Yeah, so Lucas, US Foods, senior manager. The title maybe doesn't necessarily communicate what I do very effectively. I do serve I fill too many roles. So I'm an individual contributor to some parts of the week. I do a lot of pair programming with people and do code reviews with people. But I'm also the manager, as in I'm, I guess, solutions architect for machine learning and data science, or business analytics, even solutions sometimes, just depending on how much automation is going in. I build out some of the architecture on AWS. So we have a little bit of we have an opportunity to grow with a lot of ML ops and, in general, just engineering work. And so therefore I fill that role out of interest of my own, and just the skill gaps that I fill relative to my peers even at the company. So that's a lot of that. And I'm responsible for, building the best practices in our team. So I co-lead a center of excellence for data science, as well as am responsible for the work that goes out through one of our pillars called customer-centric sales. Really, it's just a bunch of marketing stuff, right? So retention, trying to figure out who our next prospects are and so forth. I lead the design of and then delivery of all of those projects. So that's where I'm at currently. How I got started, my background isn't necessarily like traditional, but I don't think anybody has that if they've had a few years, in the industry. I finished my math degree, kind of dabbled around things, didn't know what to do. My first job really was, and networking was brought up before that. It was networking, or really kind of complaining during one of my master's classes. So I got my master's at DePaul a few years back, and I was just complaining about a job, and so the person sitting right next to me, who I chatted with once in a while, said, "Hey, but we're kind of hiring for someone. Why don't you just apply, right? You sound like you know what you're doing during this class, right? So you're probably a perfect fit." It started off as more of like a business analyst kind of role, but within 2 months of my role, just out of my interest and my skills in programming in Python and just machine learning, I jumped right into data science, right? So yeah, it was kind of grow because of my desire. So that's one of the big things. My big advice is for this industry is really there's no it's kind of guidelines around there, but there's no defined path. And so the way I've made my career really is just out of learning on my own, learning with my peers at the work as well as outside of work, and then just going for whatever I wanted, right? So like I said, my current role doesn't really have its own definition. I'm kind of crafting it as it is, and I'm owning what the future is going to be really of my team in my career.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your experience. So it seems like this recurring theme that keeps coming up is about how, there's new technologies, how data science wasn't really much of a thing back then, but now it's, and it keeps on sort of ever evolving, and there's a lot of continuous learning involved. So I want to talk about maybe your perspective on how the industry has changed in the past 5 years, and what do you guys predict will happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
Sure. Should I go first?
Please go ahead.
Okay, sure. Oh, how's it changed? I mean, shoot, it was already brought up, right? The title wasn't even around a few years ago. I really regret when I was in college, there was this big sign in the computer science department saying, data mining. I had no idea what that was. I was a traditional, like, theoretical mathematician there, right? If you even want to call yourself a mathematician while you're doing your bachelor's. But yeah, I was doing all that stuff. I had no idea what data mining was. Now I really regret it because I get, a heads up of a few years in my career. But nonetheless, right? So, it went from that to becoming really kind of just statistics changed to the point where it is now, and at least my perspective is, the analytics in the sense of just dabbling around and experimenting is done with. And so MLOps has kind of popped up as a term. It's maybe there's a lot of cliches there, and I really don't like buzzwords, but it's really important for an organization to be able to take an experiment, rebuild it constantly, test it as well, right? So if your testing's off, automatically you can't rebuild it, right? But being able to test an experiment, iterate through many experiments, and then be able to iterate on your final productionalized solution, consistently and continuously, right? So it's changed from this analytical kind of aspect, statistical aspect, over to more of a software engineering, or I would just say engineering, right? More of an engineering foundation. And so what I think in the future, in the next 5 or so years, is that there's going to be no compromise there. Whoever sacrifices on their engineering will fail as a department. They will not return ROI because, you're going to have to quickly iterate. So the data scientist role maybe is going to shift to becoming like, if you don't know how to write unit tests for your code, you're not a data scientist, right? Maybe that's my perspective. So I try to, on my team, instill that engineering mindset as well as, like, the best practices. But we'll see what time tells, right? I know AutoML's out there, but that solves a very niche solution. And so I really don't think we're talking about AutoML or anything like that replacing a data scientist. If anything, it's one little tiny tool to solve a problem. And shoot, to be frank, US Foods, like, I'll just take that company as an example. It's multi-billion-dollar of revenue. Right now in COVID, maybe it fell a little, but right during the regular world, it's multi-billion in revenue. And even at a company like that, and I've been at bigger companies in the past too, where maybe the most interesting problem isn't really involving ML, right? So it really is just operationalizing some like statistical tiny solution, but the operationalization is what the key is the key differentiation.
Yeah, if I could jump on that, just because you mentioned the AutoML, I think that does give a good highlight for the future, and that some of the stuff that can be automated to a degree will be. I mean, you might be able to, better tune a ARIMA model on your own versus running auto ARIMA, but in many cases, it's a good enough solution. So so I think the focus of a data scientist down the road, kind of as Lucas was saying, is both setting up the production as well as the asking, what are you trying to get at? Because a lot of times when people come to you with a project, that's not what they're going after. There's like 5 whys, to get to what do they actually want. And then you can figure out the proper way to get there. So it's a lot of the asking questions and figuring out how systems work. Like a lot of my day-to-day at the moment is almost data engineering, of trying to get systems to work together and trying to get just information to work together. There's over 1 trillion ways that you could build a truck. How do you control the complexity of that? An AutoML model won't really address that in a useful manner. So if you're worried about the auto robots or auto ARIMA taking over your future, I mean, like Lucas said, that's 5% of what's actually going on. And then just the other comment of where it was in the past to where it will be in the future. If you look at it, 10 years ago, there was the open source versus closed source argument of why would you want to go to R? SaaS, has, I think the term was licensed or accredited each of their functions. So yeah, it's trustworthy. And that whole debate has gone in the trash, and people have moved on to actually making awesome things. And there's a lot more openness recently to beginners, minorities. Is turning into a much friendlier environment, than what it might have been in the past. sure that some of that is based on where you are. I'm sure that there's, especially if you're on the West Coast, a lot of tech pros, for example. But let's say it's moving in a better direction than it was in the past.
So I'll jump in there, and Dorian, a couple of things that you mentioned and Lucas mentioned as well. It's I would say you want to stay up on the technology, and that's going to be table stakes for your role, especially if you stay on the technology path. And that's going to change every 2 to 3 years, every 5 years for sure. It's going to look different, right? To your point, SaaS was the king of everything at one point, and they kind of got set in their ways and the way they price things and all of that. And so companies looked for these other alternatives that ended up being, potentially more efficient, but definitely at a lower cost point and easier to enter into at times. So again, focus on the technology, continue to sharpen those skills and learn them. But I would say equally as balanced, you need to understand the business. You need to understand what are people looking for. Dorian was spot on when he said someone's going to come with a request, and what they're asking for is not really what they want or what they need until you dig into it further. And the more that you as an individual can understand the overall business, right? What's the commerciality? How are we making money? What are the problems that you're trying to solve? The better off you will be. So the closer that the folks that are sitting within a technology or an engineering or a data scientist role can learn that and think more like a business person, or something that you would think of from a business administration, the stronger you will be at delivering the products that you're asked to deliver on. So it has to be a balance of those two. And I think that is going to continue to be something that's weighed even heavier as time goes on.
So a misconception I had when I initially was starting to look into data science, and at the time it was sort of a new term. I was like, okay, I've done my 4 years in undergrad and my 2 years in master's. All that technology and skills that I've learned, I should be good to go. False. Similar to what everyone else was mentioning, how like SAS is kind of like up there, no one really talks about it. At the time, Ruby was kind of like giving a nice competition to Python. No one talks about Ruby. So just want to remind you that as a data scientist, analyst, engineer, however the name changes, you are in an industry where you are continuously learning. You should always be open to trying new tools, finding new approaches, being able to look at a problem in a different lens. And that will help you be able to stay up with the times. One thing that I've noticed going into the future with the way that we have Internet of Things, right? Mostly everyone has a smartphone. You have Alexa, you got Google, you have Siri, all these different activities going on with your smart devices, that it's time for things to be more inclusive. So I think ethical artificial intelligence is most definitely leading more of the conversations, whether those are tools that are used to help do facial recognition to find out someone's harmful in a certain area. Even as simple as some of the Zoom backgrounds, being able to detect, okay, this is a person. Everything in the back, we can layer that off with a truck background, like in Dorian's picture. But being able to always have that open mind to the different tools that you have, I think regardless of whatever the future is in data science, just remember to be open to learning new things, and that you are the bridge between the technical and the non-technical side of organizations.
Yeah, I'll just jump in actually. So there's a lot of cool ideas thrown around here. The business problem should not be underplayed at all, ever. And that's like something that is not done justice in academics at all, right? Example, just recently, because we face clients, so national sales, right? National sales, like big chains, like we want to just do prospecting. That was literally said during a meeting. It's like, what does that even mean? I have no idea. So it took a week just to define the business problem, right? And that is extremely important. And even early in your career, the quicker you understand that and be an effective communicator and trying to distill the business problem from words into whatever the mathematics you're going to do, even just to define your labeled data set, for example, right? Like that's extremely important. The quicker you do that early on, the quicker you'll move up, even if you just think about it from like a hierarchy perspective. It's very like, you look at the Googles, the Amazons, and even there, that's not true 100%, but it's very small, the case where you're going to sit around as an academic and figuring out new algorithms. That's just not it, right? You're going to pip install some package, right? You're going to use that package for its sake, and then you're going to just be able to, you know, see whether the business problem was solved and how is it solved mathematically, right? Understanding those are probably the most important aspects.
And if I could jump on Lorraine's comment as well, just because it reminded me of a story of there was a city that had a app on your phone that would detect potholes, and they were using this to determine, okay, where do we need to send the road teams out to fix the potholes? And shockingly, all the potholes in the city were in the rich neighborhood because they didn't really take a look at, you know, where's their data coming from? Oh, it's only coming from the rich people that at that time had, you know, smartphones. And so, you know, there really is an impact of data ethics, you know, beyond everything else of, you know, how well is, you know, is able to detect my face versus Lorraine's on a Zoom background like this, but also just, I guess, similar to that of, you know, is your data set complete? How biased is it that it's gonna, you know, kill you down the road?
Yeah, thank you for sharing, everyone. I love this theme of continuous learning and not only, you know, updating our technical skills, but also sharpening our analytical skills as well as our business acumen. So, going off on that, how do you guys keep developing your skills? You know, what type of mediums do you guys use to, you know, either keep on sharpening those skills or just staying informed with what's happening in the industry?
I most definitely listen to podcasts during lunch, and I'm kind of interested right now in artificial intelligence. So that's where my podcasts have been leading to. Also, I mentor students who are going into data science on the side. So that helps me stay updated about what type of things the industry is looking for data science, because that clearly will change. And then also participating in like those coding events, like Kaggle, Leak Code, Hackers Rank, those type of things. They're free for the most part. So it doesn't hurt to like just jump on and just try some of those little problem codes to keep me updated on my skills.
I do a variety of things. You know, we send around articles on our like Slack or Teams because we got both at our company. So we send articles around. So that's kind of my network shares a bunch of information, does the job for me, so I don't have to constantly do my own research. I know Uber has an interesting engineering blog, and they'll touch a little bit of everything, honestly. So I'll read stuff like that. Yeah, the biggest source of my, at least recently, is just that, so being a manager, I'm exposed to many projects, right? And there's various problems you have to solve, and you have no idea how to solve them sometimes, right? Or most of the time, right? It's not the case that you just have a simple classification problem, really, right? And so that just forces you to do research, right? So I'll just go online, just start like, how has this been solved in the past? And really, I mean, there's many ways of doing it. You look at academic literature, a lot of times that's interesting. You could just, you know, look at whatever, the most recent publications have code for you, even available on GitHub. So it's super cool just to pull down the code and easily experiment with it, you know, instantly, or just look up examples. Literally, like I'll type in AWS CloudFormation template example for this and this, and there's someone who did something cool, and you'll take, you know, 10% of this, 10% of that, and kind of piece things together and learn as you go.
Yeah, I would echo, you know, what's already been said, and the one podcast, and I'll throw it in the chat, that I listen to is called the Leadership Podcast. So again, not necessarily, you know, down a specific technology path, but in general, what's happening from an aspect of leadership as you potentially transition from maybe being an individual contributor into being a manager or a director. You know, it's a different skill set that you're going to be honing in on. And there's going to be maybe a little bit of letting go of some of the technical and going towards some of the softer skill side. And how do you balance that out and making a determination if that's the role that you want to go down? So that's one aspect that I listen to. And then the other I would say is, in addition to what already has been said, is just talking to people. And in the past year, I think the conversations have really increased because people are willing to have conversations. It's convenient. You're not going anywhere for the most part. People are doing it from the comfort of their home and time. They have a little bit more flexibility. They're not doing a commute. And what I found is the more you ask, most people are willing to connect and share information. So, I mean, the worst thing someone's going to do is say, no, I don't have time, or I'm not interested. But I find most people, have a very positive attitude towards things and are willing to help out or to share information. If, you hear something on here today, or you're talking to others and you want to dig deeper into it, most people are going to say, yeah, I'd be glad to follow up on that.
Yeah, on the podcast standpoint, I used to listen to, I think it was Linear Digressions. It would give you like a 10-minute episode of just different topics. So, a 10-minute intro to survival curve, 10-minute intro to T-SNE, just enough to figure out, okay, will this ever apply to me and I want to pay attention to it, or should I ignore it for the future? Other than that, I mean, there's, especially now with COVID, but even before then, there's a lot of conferences that are online, Pi Data and, various other ones that, will throw their conference talks up on YouTube so you can watch. So our team used to have a weekly lunch and learn where, we'd pile into a conference room and we'd watch a 30-minute presentation on something that applies to the current projects we're working on. And then also see Lucas with your Uber, and I'll raise you a Stitch Fix. They also have a really good blog, and they've started even recording some of their conversations on topics. And then Netflix will not shut up about their architecture. If you look for Netflix on YouTube, there is going to be a million videos of them talking about how their architecture is set up for data science. Finally, like there's some cheap conferences in Chicago, like our finance is pretty cheap. Saturdays, if you're an R user, is pretty cheap. And then also we have two national labs in the area. And one of them, Argonne, has regular talks that oftentimes apply to data sciences that applies to nuclear physics or biology. And while that might not apply directly to what I'm working on, sometimes they're running into similar issues of, billions of ways that protein can fold. How are they dealing with that issue? Could it apply to what I'm working on? Just like was said before, look outside of just your direct area and look elsewhere for who else has solved this problem, even if they're in a completely different field.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I love the, all the specific sources that you guys mentioned, and also talking about networking. That is always so important. Just to pivot back onto a student's question that was in the chat about the job search, what would you recommend for applicants to present to a recruiter versus a hiring manager to stand out compared to the stack of resumes that they typically get?
Yeah, so I've been a part of a lot of interviewing. I've been a part of creating those job descriptions, or not being a part of creating job descriptions, which is maybe one thing I'll throw out, is that, it depends. So some companies will take a lot of the advice of hiring managers into what's put down in a job description. And sometimes they will literally take like 5 people into a room and just kind of write down everything everybody said. So you'll take like a junior person who requires 5 years of engineering and ML ops and data science and PhD. It's just ridiculous. So I would apply for more things than not, right? That's first of all. And, you'll get filtered out if they really, truly, do not want you. And that's probably a good thing for both you and the company, right? That's one thing. The buzzwords have to be in your resume for at least, the first original screen. Is unfortunate, but if people really, really, really want AWS, at least for the HR person, right? and you're between you or somebody who has GCP, they're probably going to choose the person who is AWS. And you don't know how much time the hiring manager has. Maybe that's just simply the limiting factor. Like they can only fit in X amount of interviews, and therefore that's the reason you got filtered out. So try to put in whatever fits your resume really to the job description. So that's kind of some of the obvious stuff. But I mean, what to say? So once you get the interview, I mean, just be personable, be personable, right? Communicate your story, and the story should be probably focused on the projects that you've worked on. So what did you solve? That should probably be number one. It's not all the details of what you did, but what did you solve? And how did you do it, high level? With respect to the hiring manager, that'll depend too. So that'll depend, because if it's a technical person, you could jump right into technical things, still thinking about how you communicate it using a story. But sometimes the hiring managers are not technical people, and what they are doing really is just facilitating your ability to do your work. So shape your conversation to the person, right? Keep in mind, I would always ask the question of like, who are you really, right? And what value, well, not value, that's going to seem bad, but like, what do you do for the team and how do we work together, right? If they answer that question with being a technical, shape yourself to that audience. If not, then do so as well.
Yeah, to jump in on that, as far as the buzzwords go, especially stuff for like AWS, you'll also want to spell it out, because in all likelihood, the person doing the filter on that is in HR and doesn't actually know what you're talking about. So if they know to watch for Amazon Web Services and you have AWS, they may not realize that that's the same thing. And then I would ask either the recruiter or the HR rep that's setting up your interview about what the format is. A lot of companies do different formats. Some are very technical, some are more conversational. For us, we do a panel interview where it's kind of a round robin of one person's asking more technical questions. The next person is asking questions that lead to, do I want to be sitting in a cube next to you for 3 years? Because interviewing or hiring someone is not just, do you have the technical skills? It's, are they going to be a benefit or a detriment to the company through technical issues, as well as are they just going to sour the team and make it a place you don't want to work? Yeah, that's my initial thoughts. So I'll let someone else speak.
I can jump in. So I agree that the resume, put your data hat on, right? And think about artificial intelligence. And most resumes are being screened by a computer before they're being screened by a person. So the buzzwords and the technical terms need to be on there to get through that first point. And then I think you do need to go into storytelling mode and creating a brand image, and that even starts on your resume. So, if I'm scanning a resume personally, I don't want to see paragraphs worth of information. I want to see the highlights, and I want to know what you did in particular, and how does that relate to results. So I want to know where it ties to results, and that should be in the first third of the resume on that first page from that perspective. I would say my viewpoint is the resume only gets you so far, right? It has to be accurate, it has to be clean, it has to be readable. But it's really that first conversation that you're going to have. And I would go back to that concept that I mentioned earlier of networking. How do you find a warm introduction into that organization? And that's not always easy, but again, the more people you're connected to, you can see if someone knows someone, and maybe they have a contact there within the HR organization or within actually the technology organization. You can also find out about the organization that way. Is it an organization that you want to work at? So keep in mind, when you're interviewing, it's a two-way street. You want to make that decision as well as to, is this a place I want to be at? Dorian mentioned, do I want to sit next to this person in the cube? Well, you should be asking yourself that question as the interviewer. Do you see yourself in this environment, in this culture, and being able to do that assessment? But again, I would just go back to where you can find those connections. LinkedIn has continued to explode from where it started. I would you know, of all the social media, I think it's the one that probably has the longest shelf life and continues to grow, and people tend for the most part to respect it and use it for what it's intended to be. And it's a way to keep, you know, keep all your contacts intact and be able to make these connections that there's no way you'd be able to keep, you know, in a paper copy or even in an Excel spreadsheet for that matter. So it's my thoughts on the resume and the interviewing. Differences between the recruiter and the hiring manager, you know, is already called out. Recruiter may be HR focused and they're going to look for culture fit. They're going to look for the check the box. The hiring manager is the one that's going to be working with you directly more than likely. So they're going to be focused on that balance between technical and personal skills.
I know we've done a lot of talk about resume. Also, think about your digital resume as well. Please make sure what you have on your paper resume matches what's on LinkedIn, because the first thing I'm going to do is look you up on LinkedIn to find out if you're really telling me the truth. Also, LinkedIn just is set up to allow you to provide more detailed information that you can't really do on a one-sheeter. Another thing, especially if you're transitioning from a different industry into data science and you're trying to showcase not only your transferable skills, but these new data science skills you acquire, either use a capstone or a small short-term project to help showcase, these are the new skills, this is how I've applied them with this analysis. And then on top of that, I'm a great storyteller because I've created this type of dashboard, or I've been able to measure my metrics about how successful this is. And it shows that you're not only able to identify transferable skills and the direct value that you can bring to the company, but it also shows you're in that mindset of, this is what it looks like when I'm working with a project and how I can scale it up or how I can improve it. Or if you have a problem like this could be a possible approach of how I would do that. Let's kind of talk that through the interview. So then the focus is redirected back to, this is who I am now as a data analyst or data scientist, and this is what I can provide, versus you having to kind of fight a little bit more about why they shouldn't really look at your prior experience in a different industry.
Yeah, and to add to that of, you know, how LinkedIn is kind of your digital resume, also consider, you know, GitHub as well as your DePaul website in addition to that, because especially if you provide a link, and sometimes if you don't, I will go and check on that and see, you know, okay, from their GitHub, what type of stuff are they actually working on? You know, they mentioned that they're great at this, but when I look at the project, you know, is it something really good, or is it, you know, do I feel like they were misleading on their skill set? In which case, during the interview, I might ask more questions.
I'll jump in with one thing actually that wasn't mentioned before, that you are interviewing the company as much as the company is interviewing you. I think, you know, for me, if I speak from personal experience, that came to me, you know, through my experience. So as I got, you know, my next job and so forth, I ended up actually, you know, taking that on to a personal sense. But, you know, even early in a career, I know that it's, you know, like say the first job, or you have a limited amount of positions that you have available. So you're really just hoping for that one offer or two, whatever, right? But you're going to be there. You're going to be there for a while. Make sure you understand what type of role you're getting into too. So data scientist is a title that's thrown around a lot, but sometimes it's not a data science role in reality. Like if you see dashboarding, like creating dashboards, most likely that is not the data science role that you are expecting it to be, right? So make sure you ask those questions, very detailed questions around, you know, what type of work do you do and what will I be doing for that type of work? If they mention, say, you'll be a small percentage time, is like, no, but like really, like, you know, say a person who's my peer, how much time do they spend weekly? Or, you know, if they work in say, sprints, right? So like an agile cadence, like, okay, so during a sprint, how much time does this come up actually, right? They should be able to give you a good sense of it, especially if they work in an agile environment, right? Because they're keeping track of this type of work. So ask those questions, because you might regret it later by just saying that you took something you were not expecting.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think it's something that every student really needs to think about while they're interviewing, right? It's much as you being interviewed as you are interviewing them. And, at the end of the day, you want to get a job that you like. So yeah, hopefully our students will keep that in mind. I just wanted to just quickly say that we do have about 10 minutes left. So if any of our students who are here would like to ask any questions, please send them in the chat. Something I personally wanted to ask is, so we've talked about networking and the value of it, but right now with COVID, obviously networking looks how we can network looks a little different. So how do you guys personally do you think is an effective way to network? Like if a student were to come to you reaching out, looking to join your network, like what would make a student, sort of stand out? What would you be willing to, like how would they have to approach you so that you respond to them, I guess?
So my perspective is always that kind of warm introduction, right? And so if someone was to just send me a blank request and I don't know who they are, I don't have any tie to them to connect, I'm probably not going to accept that. Versus I'll use this forum as an example. I would go out there after the call and send a note to all the folks that I'd want to connect to, say, hey, we were on that panel discussion. I really liked what you had to say, or I really appreciated, your insights or thoughts about this. Love to stay connected on LinkedIn. Are you open to connecting? And maybe I want to grab that, in this world, a virtual coffee to learn more. I think that is more than acceptable, at least from my perspective. At least I know where it's coming from, and we had some introduction from that perspective. So I would take that to every event or every interaction, I should say, that you have, and leverage that to kind of continue to grow that network, because it is exponential in the way that it works. And that way you have that ability to continue to meet more people, so that when you're faced with looking at a new opportunity or the first opportunity, you can reach out to more people from that perspective. So again, keeping it from a perspective of a commonality, in COVID times, using groups. So what groups are you interested in? What other groups can you join? Someone mentioned, there's a lot of free kind of conferences or seminars or webinars. Join as many of those and be interactive in them as you can, and be an active participant. Ask questions, because that's what other people are going to notice if they're sitting there, even if it is through a Zoom call.
Was just looking for it because my buddy introduced me to this app, which is called Lunch Club. So if you're looking for just like a general, outside of everything that's already been mentioned, but a general, it's not related to data science, but you could put that on there as one of your interests. And you get paired up with people and you tell them how frequently you want to do this. And I've already had a few conversations which turned into great conversations, and it's all virtual, and I think it'll stay virtual. So it's something you could do. But I agree with everything that was said. I guess it's just the way it works, right? The higher your title, the more people start seeking out for other people, right, as mentors, or just getting information or getting into a position, right? And so they'll find you on LinkedIn and you'll get flooded with like 50 different messages, right? Or no message. And that's usually the case, that there's nothing there. So if you're like cold calling, because I've done it in the past too, I've emailed the CEO and got a job like that, right? So definitely, send out a message, but just try to, communicate something about yourself and like, what's the point of reaching out to me, and what do you really want from it? If it's just a conversation, I'm more than willing to have conversations with people. People have given me that opportunity in the past, and I'll definitely give it to you if you put the effort into it.
Go ahead, Lori.
Okay, I agree with everything that's been mentioned. I am a screener for everything. If you're not saved in my phone, I will not respond. If you're not giving me a detailed message about what you want, I will not respond. So please, like Michael and Lucas mentioned, have a warm greeting, remind where we may have met, because that's also very helpful. And then like, what is it you're interested in? So I can measure out my time appropriately, right? Like, evening times are more for casual discussions, but if we want to talk business about joining Booz Allen, then maybe I want to work that inside of my day. If you're nervous about using LinkedIn and other cold calling, another popular app if you have an iPhone, is Clubhouse. A lot of people have been using that, whether it's for product management or artificial intelligence, whatever genre topic you're interested in. You can use that to kind of not only find people who may be levels above you, but also work within your peer level so that when you guys are growing within data science, you're building out your network horizontally and vertically as well.
Yeah, and keep in mind that for a lot of data scientists, they were introverts before COVID started. So there was the form of how to have, the socialization occur without having to meet at a bar or coffee shop. So there's, public Slack channels like R for Data Science. That's a networking area for people that are entering data science through R. So, and Twitter is also another good one. Surprisingly, where if you follow a handful of people, you'll find out who's the interesting people to talk to, and then as everyone else said before, have meaningful conversations with them, and that will lead into, a social connection that you could then build on in the future.
Yeah, honestly, there are so many good pieces of information that I just got. I mean, Clubhouse Lunch Club, I had never heard of that. If any of you guys are not taking notes, it's all in the chat. So I would make sure to just, keep all that in mind. As we are approaching sort of the end of the hour, I'm gonna turn it back to Lauren. Or maybe not.
I am here. No, I am here. Sorry, I was copying and pasting notes and stuff from the chat. We will be emailing everybody that was here today, all of our student participants, as well as everyone that registered, with this recording, along with the resources that were discussed and put in the chat. So if you didn't get everything, don't worry, we will be sending that stuff to you. I'm putting a couple of additional links in the chat here. One, we shared this up top, but this is how to schedule an appointment with a career advisor. I did want to, before going on with that, I wanted to thank all of our panelists today for participating and taking their time. And I definitely wanted to thank Sang for leading this discussion. Sang, you did a great job. That was awesome. I hope everybody learned a ton here today. I'm going to put one more link in the chat. If you want to stay on top of future events that we're putting on, make sure you join our Tech and Design LinkedIn group. That's where we post a lot of our event info as well as other job and internship postings. I'm going to close things out. I'm going to launch this exit poll. Obviously, panelists, you don't need to fill this out, but if our guests today could, this just lets us know how we're doing, what we're doing well, things we can do better next time. So please, be honest with your feedback. We really value that stuff and really appreciate it. But again, I would just wanted to thank everyone for coming today and for listening, for having such a great and informative discussion. And panelists, again, we really, 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 really appreciate your time, and we know that students do too. Yeah, so we'll be keeping the chat open until 5, but if after you complete that exit poll, if you need to take off, feel free. And we'll close things down at 5. But thanks again.
Thank you. Hey, I have a question for the other panelists. So I sometimes make the recommendation that after an applicant has an interview, that they try to send a thank you email the next day, not because of the whole etiquette thing, but A, because if it's the next day, it takes up mind space, and B, because I don't share my email address with the applicant. So that's, to me, impressive problem solving if they got my email address. What's your opinions on that? Creepy, or do you guys support, or do you have any other interesting tricks like that you would recommend for applicants?
I've never done it as a trick, but I like that idea, I guess. I mean, usually it's pretty simple, right? It's first dot last name, so you just really knew who you talked to, right? It's a good test of that. I don't know. I don't really somebody sends me an email, it's a nice touch, but in the end, I try to stay pretty objective about technical abilities. And then, I don't know, it does say something about a person though, right? I mean, they did reach out, they spent that next couple seconds, right, to write an email to me. So I don't know.
I like it. A nice trick is trying to get business cards if people are still passing that out, or you can just do the old school way of pre-making your small cards beforehand and then like just write down whoever the names are and try to leave it off at the front desk. I think it's nice for if you feel like you've bombed an interview, but you still want to be in their pipeline. I think that's a nice like, hey, I know I've messed up a bit, but think about me because I'm gonna like develop my skills again. I'm gonna see y'all in like another 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, I would just add, I think a thank you is always a good thing. I don't think it needs a lot of time. I think it needs to have the right, kind of salutations and ending and correct grammar, because the last thing you want to do is, shoot yourself in the foot because you're not spelling or, you have grammatical mistakes. People will look at that from an aspect of detail. But yeah, I think having that is a good thing, but similar to Lucas, I don't think it's a decisioning factor of someone getting the job. Usually that decision is made, as the interview is going on or shortly after the person leaves the room. You've kind of set your mind as to whether you're going to move them on in the process.
Let's just jump in and say one thing. I had a candidate one time, and it was just a matter of choosing one against another who were extremely well qualified. And this person took a very effective, like just notes during an interview, which is probably one of the first times I saw that. When they emailed me back, they gave me like a list of things that they would be really interested in like working with. We ended up hiring them. I don't know if it was just because of that. There was various people involved with it, but that was interesting. So they not only like spent time sending an email, but they spoke to specific projects because they definitely asked that, like what would they be working on. So just, it definitely communicated where their mind was at, and it did come to fruition that later on we did notice that they were very organized, which is a good quality, right? They were very much detailed and knew what they were going to be doing now and later on. So I don't know, just wanted to share that.
We love to hear some of the behind the scenes of what's happening, because as students, we don't know as much. But yeah, glad to know that, taking notes is a good thing. Maybe I'll just start doing that for my interviews.
And asking good questions. If you're an applicant that has no questions or, just the simplest of questions, that is very different versus an applicant that, even if it's not a technical question, even if it's, what should I expect my, work-life balance to be? I really appreciate when they ask questions like that. It shows a better level of maturity than someone that just nods throughout the interview and then has no questions at the end.
Speaking of asking questions, this is one question that a professor in undergrad told me, and it has changed my whole interviewing, regardless of how well I've done on it. The question is, what is one thing that before you joined the organization, you considered a weakness that got turned into a strength? So it like humanizes the interviewer, because I know like when you're in front of them, you're just very nervous, like, there's so much power. So it levels out the power, 1. 2, it helps you understand what company or the interviewer, how they process a challenge and how they go through that. And then it also gives another hint into the professional development, because like we mentioned earlier, interviewing was a two-way street. So if I'm going to be spending my 40 plus hours at a job, I would also want to make sure that same job will be able to help me develop professionally.
Yeah, I've always tried to ask questions because it's important to me, but it's like, what happens when you fail? Like in data science, you do a lot of research and a lot of experimentation. It's like, so how do you, work with your business clients when things don't work out? How do you, check whether things are working or not, right? How do you, what do you do when you just hit a wall completely and you have no idea where to proceed. Like, who are your sources that you go to? So if you're an individual contributor, or it's your peer that you're interviewing with, because that happens many times, you get a sense from them what type of team you're going to be working on. Are you like stranded? Are you working very closely with your manager? Are there other people that they look up to? It's hard to fake those things. And, you only have the 30 or 45 minutes you're spending with somebody. So those types of questions are really going to hit some like details that you really should know.
Okay, so final question for the other panelists. I've heard two bits of advice. I myself argue that you should be good at, between R and Python, you should be good at one language, competent at the other, and I don't care which is which. I've heard other people say, no, you should spend all of your time on one language, focus on that, so that, you're, perfect at that language. How do you guys feel for interviewing? Like, my reason for this is if let's say we're in our house and you have focused completely on Python and have never seen R before, there's going to be a heck of a ramp up period to get you up to speed. But if you're at least familiar with the tidyverse, let's say, and have run a couple minor programs, but, not beyond that, cool. You've taken the first couple of steps. It's a lot easier to get you up to speed then. So argue with me. How do you guys feel on that?
Shots fired, R versus Python. I'll just throw this out there because I started off coding in a little bit of Python. No like scikit-learn was available back then though. Then I did R, then I went back into Python. So I can feel the sentiment, but it's a very difficult thing to ask from somebody, right? So first of all, once you already have the job, you don't know what type of architecture they have. So we, for example, I'll just throw out some words. We use Dockerization, right? So great, you can build whatever you want and then just package it up and ship it off. But really, that's not something you see everywhere, right? So if you are working for a Python shop, I mean, when are you going to be spending your time doing R? So I guess my thought to say there is, and then also, I guess here's another thing is that once you get more experience, I mean, you will develop a better sense of expertise in one over the other. And I mean, at that point, I mean, if you've got like 5 years under your belt, you can just choose whatever job you want, right? At least for now. I mean, who knows what'll happen in the future, but you could choose whatever you want. So I'll reject every job unless it really blows my mind from like an opportunity perspective that is just R, right? I'm not good with R, I'm good with Python, and I can choose, right? At the beginning though, I mean, yeah, I can see it though. I can totally see it. Be at least competent in a little bit and be able to read R. So I can at least read R. So you're not gonna blow, like completely shock me if you see that. I mean, I could read a few other languages. So yeah, I think you mentioned too before that you should, language or tools change, right? So yeah, I'd agree, but I also say that it's hard to do, and therefore, make your own decision. But one I guess theme to keep in mind is the fact that technology changes always. So don't be just constantly rooted into one technology and just grind your teeth down, because that's just not going to serve you in the next decade. It's impossible, right? No matter how beautiful Python is, I don't know what's going to happen in a decade, right? So
Hey man, S forever.
S forever. Yeah, there you go. I mean, people still need COBOL programmers. They're paying a fortune for it, right? So I mean, maybe I'm wrong completely, right? You create this niche super expertise, and people will just scale your salary exponentially in the future as people have these legacy systems that build their whole company's infrastructure on, right?
So Lorraine, Michael, any thoughts?
I started off with R. So Python's cool. I get what it's doing. It's hot right now. But I have a philosophy more about being chameleon, because like Lucas has mentioned, depends on the environment that you're going into. Like one point I was only working in R, and then I got into a different environment where it's just like Python is what we're using to do what we need to do. So the fact that I'm able to read both, it does help reduce the scale up time. But most definitely, I feel like regardless of which languages you learn, that someone in the data science space should know at least two, just to help make sure you understand the concepts of like functions, how to develop an algorithm, when it's appropriate to use certain while loops or if loops, stuff like that. And then the syntax is just kind of easy to pick up versus having to really teach someone from scratch how to interact with a certain language. But R is better.
So I'll date myself a little bit. COBOL was the first language that I learned, and I wish I had the knowledge that Lucas just talked about, and I kept up with it, but I don't think I could continue down that path or that pace today. Here's the example I would give. I would think about a T account in accounting. So if anyone's had an accounting class, you use a pencil and paper T account for credits and debits, right? So you just think about the letter T, and that's the way I would think about your skills. You want to be deep in something, and so you can pick R or Python, but you want to be broad in multiple applications, multiple languages, multiple skills, because of that fact that it's continuing to evolve. So when I'm interviewing and we're selecting resources, I'm looking for someone that is basically full stack from a lot of different aspects and can go broad as well as then go deep in at least one or two of those skill sets.
Yeah, I'll just say that also, like, just doing that during your job, you're going to probably be wearing many hats to begin with, but doing that, it's just going to put you ahead of the game in general. Like, you'll be involved in more projects and people will be looking for you, because many times it is the case where they're like, well, we don't need this, but if you have it, that's fantastic. And what I'll say there is, like, AWS, like, if I find 2 data scientists, one of which, and they're both like equally qualified technically, but one of them knows how to do stuff in AWS, you're just going to make my life a lot easier. Even if your only job is going to be talking with a dedicated team who does all the integration and stuff. So I'll expand that. Don't just keep it as Python and R. You can throw in like a little bit of knowledge of Spark, a little bit of C, right? Because if you want to compile your package in C, and so you can use it in Python, perfect, right? Yeah, it's kind of overwhelming. I'll share this. At the beginning of my career, it was extremely overwhelming to get into this because of the huge just breadth of things that are thrown around. It's like all these algorithms, and then you jump into deep learning, and then you jump into all the programming languages, and then it's like, okay, well, now you get into like software engineering foundations and so forth. So there's a lot there. So the only reason I hesitate also at the beginning is you can't do everything, and don't try to do everything. I mean, don't try to do everything with a balance, because you can very easily burn yourself out. And I'm speaking totally from my own personal experience. I got to the point where it was like, I'm juggling a full-time job, doing a full-time master's, having to learn all this other stuff on my own too, right? So it's a lot.
Yeah, I think overwhelmed is a very good way to describe it. I also really love this, friendly fight about which is better. My take is that R is better, just because it's the first thing I learned too. But yeah, we are at time. I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. But thank you so much for coming, everyone. Thank you so much for the discussion. I thought this was really, really interesting. Personally, as a student, I learned a ton. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.